My name is Natalie Rodriguez, and last Tuesday night changed everything. The same father who called me a disappointment while cutting into his steak watched his face drain of color when I slid the acquisition papers across his dining room table. 24 hours earlier, he was lecturing me about real work and stable careers. 24 hours later, I owned his construction company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of 32 years of dismissal crumbling like poorly mixed concrete. My older brother Marcus dropped his fork. My mother Catherine froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. And my father Richard, the man who built Rodriguez Construction with his bare hands, stared at documents that proved his little disappointment had just become his boss. But this story doesn't start with acquisition papers. It starts with a community college dropout working double shifts to prove she belonged at a table where nobody saved her a seat. The Arizona heat was already oppressive at 7 in the morning when I pulled my beat-up Honda Civic into the parking lot of Southwest Community College. August in Tucson meant the asphalt was soft enough to leave tire marks, and the metal door handles could burn your palm if you weren't careful. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat, checking once more that my laptop was safely tucked inside the padded compartment. That laptop represented 3 months of saving every tip from my weekend job at the diner, every dollar I could spare from my paycheck at Dad's construction sites. Most kids my age were heading off to Arizona State or Northern Arizona University with their parents, blessing and bank accounts. I was 20 years old, starting over at a community college with an associate degree in computer science that my father had already dismissed as worthless. The previous spring, when I'd graduated high school, the conversation around our dinner table had been brief and brutal. "College is a waste of money for someone like you," Richard had said, not even looking up from his plate of enchiladas. "You'll never finish, and we'll be stuck with the debt. Marcus is going into business at ASU because he's got the head for it. You can work construction until you figure out what you're actually good at." Catherine had nodded along, as she always did when my father made pronouncements about my future. Marcus, 2 years older and golden in their eyes since he'd been quarterback of his high school team, had smirked into his food. He was heading to Arizona State University in the fall, with their full financial support, a new truck, and an off-campus apartment they'd helped him secure. I was getting a job swinging hammers and carrying materials for $12 an hour. But Uncle Tony, my father's younger brother, who ran the electrical side of Rodriguez Construction, had pulled me aside after that dinner. Tony was different from my father in ways that mattered. Where Richard was loud and decisive, Tony was thoughtful and observant. Where my father saw problems, Tony saw solutions. "You're smart, Nat," he'd said, using the nickname only he called me. "Smarter than any of us gave you credit for. Your dad sees strength in muscle and concrete, but the world's changing. These construction sites are going to run on computers and software soon, not just sweat and stubbornness." Tony had been the one to suggest community college, and more importantly, he'd been the one to help me apply for financial aid without my parents knowing. He'd also been the one to point out that computer science wasn't just about fixing broken printers and building websites. It was about solving real problems for real businesses, including construction companies that were struggling to keep up with technology. That first semester at Southwest Community College was harder than any construction job I'd ever worked. While my classmates complained about early morning classes, I was showing up to campus after 6 hours of mixing concrete and hauling materials for Rodriguez Construction. My hands were calloused and often stained with dirt that wouldn't wash completely clean. My back ached from lifting rebar, and my shoulders burned from hours of manual labor. But when Professor Martinez started teaching us about database management and project scheduling software, something clicked. I saw connections that other students missed. When we learned about automation and workflow optimization, I could visualize exactly how these concepts could transform a construction site that still operated with paper schedules and handwritten time cards. During my second semester, I started a small side business helping local contractors organize their project timelines using basic software. Nothing fancy, just spreadsheets and simple scheduling programs that could prevent the kind of costly delays and material waste I witnessed daily at Rodriguez Construction. I charged $50 per project setup, And within a few months, word had spread through the local contractor network. The money wasn't much, but it was mine. Every dollar came from solving problems with code instead of brute force, and that felt like a different kind of victory. My father remained unimpressed. When I tried to show him how a simple inventory management system could save Rodriguez Construction thousands of dollars in wasted materials, he waved me off with the dismissive gesture I'd grown to hate. "We've been doing this for 15 years without computers, Natalie. I don't need some college dropout telling me how to run my business." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a college dropout because I'd been working 60-hour weeks for his business while trying to maintain a full course load. But pointing that out would only result in another lecture about commitment and priorities. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling through his business classes at ASU while living in an apartment our parents paid for. He changed his major twice, from business management to marketing to communications, and was now in his third year with enough credits for a sophomore. But every family dinner included updates on his social life, his fraternity activities, and his plans for taking over Rodriguez Construction once he graduated. "Marcus has the vision to expand the business," my father would say with pride that was never directed toward me. "He understands the big picture." I'd learned to stay quiet during these conversations, focusing on my food while they discussed Marcus's latest business theory or his ideas for growing the company. My contributions to those discussions had stopped being welcome somewhere around my 16th birthday, when I'd suggested that Rodriguez Construction needed to modernize its project management systems. "Stick to what you know," had been my father's response then, and it remained his response whenever I offered any insight into the business I'd been working for since I was 14 years old. The breakthrough came during my third semester at Southwest Community College. Professor Kim, who taught advanced programming, had assigned a capstone project that required us to develop a software solution for a real business problem. While other students chose simple inventory systems for local retailers or basic websites for nonprofit organizations, I decided to tackle something that had been frustrating me for years: construction project management. I spent 3 months developing a comprehensive software platform that could handle everything from initial project bidding to final cost analysis. The system integrated scheduling, material ordering, subcontractor coordination, and real-time budget tracking into a single, user-friendly interface. More importantly, it was designed specifically for small to medium-sized construction companies that couldn't afford the expensive enterprise solutions that larger corporations used. The presentation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late April. Professor Kim had invited several local business owners to attend, including the owner of a small construction company who'd been struggling with project delays and cost overruns. I was nervous, but confident in my work. The software wasn't just theoretical. I'd tested every feature against real scenarios I'd encountered at Rodriguez Construction. When I finished my presentation, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the visiting construction company owner raised his hand. "How much would something like this cost to implement?" I hadn't expected that question. I'd built the software as a school project, not a commercial product. But as I stood there, looking at genuine interest from someone who understood the problems I was trying to solve, I realized I might have created something valuable. "I'd need to think about that," I said honestly. This was built as a proof of concept, but I could develop it further if there was real interest. After class, the business owner, Mike Chen, approached me with a proposition. His company, Desert Valley Construction, had been losing money on projects due to poor coordination and unexpected costs. He'd tried several existing software solutions, but they were either too expensive or too complicated for his small team to use effectively. "I'll pay you $5,000 to customize this system for my business," he said. "And if it works as well as you've demonstrated, I'll help you find other contractors who might be interested." $5,000 was more money than I'd ever had at one time. It represented months of construction work, countless hours of manual labor in the Arizona heat. But more than that, it represented validation that my skills had real value in the marketplace. I shook Mike Chen's hand without hesitation. Over the next 2 months, I worked nights and weekends to customize the software for Desert Valley Construction. I added features specific to their needs, integrated their existing vendor relationships, and trained Mike's team on how to use the system effectively. By July, Desert Valley had completed their first project using my software, and they'd come in under budget and ahead of schedule for the first time in 2 years. Mike was thrilled. He immediately connected me with 3 other local contractors who were facing similar challenges. By the end of the summer, I had 4 clients paying me a monthly subscription fee to use and maintain their customized project management systems. More importantly, I had a business. I was still living at home, still working part-time for Rodriguez Construction to pay for my remaining community college classes, and still enduring family dinners where my father discussed Marcus's bright future while treating my accomplishments as hobbies. But privately, I was building something that could change everything. The real test came during my final semester at Southwest Community College. I'd been accepted to transfer to Arizona State University to complete my bachelor's degree in computer science, but I was also earning more money from my software clients than I made from construction work. The decision should have been obvious, but nothing was simple when it involved my family's expectations. The conversation I'd been dreading happened on a Sunday evening in November. The whole family was gathered for one of my mother's elaborate dinners, complete with multiple courses and formal place settings that seemed designed to emphasize the importance of the occasion. Marcus was home from ASU for the weekend, full of stories about his internship interviews and his plans for graduate school.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Natalie's been spending too much time on that computer nonsense, my father announced as Catherine served dessert. She needs to focus on getting her degree so she can find a real job. I looked up from my untouched flan, surprised to be included in the conversation. Usually discussions about my future happened around me, not with me. I'm making good money with my software business, Dad. My clients depend on the systems I've built for them. Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Playing with computers isn't a career, Natalie. It's a distraction. Marcus is going to graduate with a business degree and take over Rodriguez Construction. You need to figure out what you're actually going to do with your life. I am figuring it out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am building a technology company that helps construction businesses run more efficiently. I have paying clients and recurring revenue. Recurring revenue? Marcus repeated with a smirk. Listen to her, Dad. She sounds like she's been reading business textbooks. Catherine reached across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. Honey, it's wonderful that you have a little side business, but you need to be realistic about your future. Your father's right that you should focus on finishing school. The dismissal in her voice was gentle but absolute. To them, my software business would always be a little side business, regardless of how much money it generated or how many problems it solved. They couldn't see past their preconceptions about what constituted real work and legitimate success. What if I told you I made more money last month from my software than Marcus's internship pays in a semester? I asked quietly. The table went silent. Richard set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. That's enough, Natalie. You're being disrespectful to your brother and to this family. Marcus is building a career. You're playing with toys. But Uncle Tony, who'd been quiet throughout dinner, finally spoke up. Richard, maybe you should listen to what she's actually accomplished before you dismiss it. Stay out of this, Tony. This is about Natalie's future, and she needs to hear the truth. The truth is that she's already building something successful while the rest of us are still talking about plans, Tony said evenly. Maybe instead of lecturing her, you should ask her to show you what she's created. My father's face reddened, the way it always did when someone challenged his authority. I don't need to see anything. I know what real business looks like, and this isn't it. I stood up from the table slowly, my chair scraping against the tile floor. You're right, Dad. You don't need to see anything. But maybe someday you'll wish you had. I walked away from that dinner table knowing that I was done trying to earn their respect through explanation or demonstration. They'd made their position clear, and no amount of success would change their fundamental belief that I was destined to disappoint them. But disappointment, I was learning, was often just another word for unexpected. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Arizona State University, declining my transfer acceptance. The second was to Mike Chen, asking if he knew any investors who might be interested in funding a technology startup focused on construction industry software. Funny you should ask, Mike said. I was just talking to David Kim. He's a software engineer who left Intel to start his own consulting firm. He's been looking for opportunities in the construction tech space. Want me to set up a meeting? 3 weeks later, I sat across from David Kim in a coffee shop in downtown Austin, Texas, explaining my vision for transforming how small and medium-sized construction companies manage their operations. David was everything I wasn't. Formally educated at Stanford, experienced in Silicon Valley startups, and connected to the kind of investor networks that could fund serious business growth. But he was also everything I needed. Where I understood construction intimately but lacked business experience, David had spent years helping technology companies scale from concepts to market leaders. Where I had regional clients and local connections, David had relationships with construction companies across the Southwest. Your software solves real problems for a large market, David said after reviewing my client data and revenue projections. But you're thinking too small. Instead of customizing systems for individual contractors, we should build a scalable platform that can serve thousands of construction companies with minimal customization. The partnership formed naturally. David would handle business development and funding, while I focused on product development and client relationships. We decided to relocate the business to Austin, where the technology ecosystem was more mature and venture capital was more accessible. I left Tucson without telling my family about the investor meetings or the partnership with David. As far as they knew, I was taking a gap year to figure things out before returning to complete my degree. The disappointment in my father's voice when I announced I was moving to Austin was familiar and predictable. "Running away isn't going to solve your problems, Natalie," he said. "When you're ready to get serious about your future, Rodriguez Construction will still be here." I didn't tell him that I was already serious about my future. I just loaded my Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove 8 hours east to a city where nobody knew my history and nobody had preconceptions about my potential. Austin in 2019 was a revelation. The city hummed with entrepreneurial energy, and conversations in coffee shops revolved around funding rounds and product launches instead of construction schedules and material costs. David introduced me to a network of founders, investors, and engineers who treated my ideas with the respect I'd never received at home. More importantly, they saw my construction industry background as an asset rather than a limitation. While other technology entrepreneurs were trying to disrupt industries they didn't understand, I was solving problems I'd experienced firsthand. That authenticity resonated with both investors and potential clients. We spent 6 months refining the software platform and developing a business model that could scale beyond individual client customization. TechFlow Solutions launched officially in January 2020, with seed funding from a group of Austin-based investors who specialized in enterprise software companies. The timing was both perfect and terrible. While the construction industry was hungry for digital transformation solutions, the global pandemic that hit 2 months after our launch created unprecedented challenges for businesses everywhere. Construction projects were delayed or canceled, and many of our potential clients were focused on survival rather than software upgrades. But crisis also created opportunity. As construction companies struggled with remote work coordination and supply chain disruptions, the inefficiencies in traditional project management became impossible to ignore. Companies that had resisted digital transformation for years suddenly needed software solutions that could help them adapt to rapidly changing conditions. TechFlow Solutions grew rapidly throughout 2020 and 2021. We expanded from serving local Austin contractors to working with construction companies across Texas, then throughout the Southwest, and eventually nationwide. The software platform that had started as a college project was now processing millions of dollars in construction projects and helping hundreds of companies operate more efficiently. David proved to be the perfect business partner. While I focused on product development and client relationships, he built the operational infrastructure necessary to support rapid growth. We hired developers, sales staff, and customer service representatives. We established partnerships with material suppliers and equipment rental companies. We raised additional funding rounds that valued TechFlow Solutions at first $10 million, then $20 million, then $31 million. By early 2023, we were processing over $1 billion in construction projects annually through our platform. Our client retention rate exceeded 90%, and our average client saw project completion times improve by 23% while reducing material waste by 18%. I was 25 years old, and I owned 45% of a company worth $31 million. But success in Austin felt incomplete, while my family in Tucson continued to see me as their disappointing daughter who'd run away to play with computers. I still received regular phone calls from my mother, asking when I was coming home to finish my education and get a stable job. Marcus had graduated from ASU and was working for Rodriguez Construction as a project manager, though his inexperience showed in the cost overruns and scheduling problems that had become increasingly common. The construction industry in Arizona was struggling. The post-pandemic economic recovery had created huge demand for residential and commercial construction, but material costs had skyrocketed, and skilled labor was scarce. Companies that couldn't adapt quickly were being squeezed between rising costs and competitive pressure. Rodriguez Construction was among the companies feeling the pressure most acutely. I learned about my father's troubles through Uncle Tony, who'd started calling me monthly to discuss both family news and construction industry trends. Tony had always been more willing to acknowledge that the business world was changing, and he'd watched TechFlow Solutions, growth with interest rather than skepticism. "Your dad's too proud to admit it, but Rodriguez Construction is in trouble," Tony told me during a call in March 2023. "Marcus has been mismanaging projects, we're consistently over budget, and we've lost 3 major contracts this year because we can't compete with companies that have better systems." Quote, "How bad is it?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Bad enough that he's been talking to potential buyers. There's a development company from Phoenix that's interested in acquiring the business, but they're offering about 60 cents on the dollar of what it should be worth." Rodriguez Construction represented 15 years of my father's life, built from nothing into a business that had supported our family and employed dozens of workers. The idea of selling it at a significant loss to a corporate buyer who would probably gut the staff and abandon the local relationships my father had cultivated was heartbreaking. It was also an opportunity. "Tony, what if I told you I might have a better option?" The conversation that followed was delicate and complex. Tony understood that my offer to help would need to be handled carefully to avoid triggering my father's pride and stubbornness. Richard would never accept assistance from his daughter, especially assistance that implied his business methods were outdated. But he might consider a business partnership with TechFlow Solutions, particularly if the partnership were presented as an expansion opportunity rather than a rescue operation. David was initially skeptical when I proposed acquiring Rodriguez Construction. "Personal business decisions rarely work out well," he warned. "Are you sure this is about business strategy and not family dynamics?" The honest answer was that it was about both. But from a pure business perspective, the acquisition made sense. Rodriguez Construction had an established client base, experienced workers, and local market knowledge that would be valuable for TechFlow Solutions' expansion into the Arizona market. More importantly, they had exactly the kind of operational inefficiencies that our software was designed to solve. If we can turn around Rodriguez Construction using our platform, it becomes a powerful case study for other construction companies, I explained to David. "We're not just acquiring a client, we're acquiring a proof of concept that demonstrates our software's impact on struggling businesses." David eventually agreed, but he insisted on structuring the deal professionally. TechFlow Solutions would acquire Rodriguez Construction through a standard merger and acquisition process, with terms that reflected fair market value rather than family sentiment. I would recuse myself from valuation discussions to avoid conflicts of interest. The process took 3 months. We conducted due diligence, analyzed financial records, and negotiated terms through lawyers and business advisors. To my father, it appeared that an Austin-based technology company had identified Rodriguez Construction as an attractive acquisition target. He had no idea that his disappointing daughter was the company's co-founder and largest individual shareholder. The final negotiations took place in Phoenix, at the offices of the law firm representing TechFlow Solutions. My father Marcus and their attorney sat across from David and the TechFlow legal team. I participated by video conference from our Austin headquarters, identified only as N. Rodriguez, co-founder and CTO. Watching my father review the acquisition terms was surreal. He was impressed by the offer, which was significantly higher than what the Phoenix development company had proposed. He was intrigued by TechFlow Solutions' plan to maintain Rodriguez Construction as an independent subsidiary with minimal staffing changes. He was even optimistic about the technology integration that would, according to the proposal, improve operational efficiency and profitability. "This tech flow company seems to understand our business," he told Marcus during a break in negotiations. "They're not trying to strip us down and sell off the pieces." Marcus, who'd been mostly quiet during the meetings, seemed less convinced. "I still think we should consider the Phoenix offer. It's a simpler transaction, and we know what we're getting." "The Phoenix offer is 40% lower," my father pointed out. "And they made it clear they'd be eliminating half our staff within 6 months. This tech flow deal lets us keep the business intact." The final terms were generous but fair. Tech Flow Solutions would acquire 100% of Rodriguez Construction for $3 million, with additional performance bonuses tied to profitability improvements over the following 2 years. Current management would remain in place, with Marcus continuing as operations manager and my father serving as a consulting advisor. The signing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Rodriguez Construction offices in Tucson. I told David the first wanted to handle the final signing personally. The drive from Austin back to Tucson took me through landscapes I'd memorized during my childhood. But everything felt different now. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of Interstate 10, dotted with saguaro cacti that stood like sentinels in the afternoon heat. I'd made this journey dozens of times as a kid, usually wedged into the back seat of my father's work truck while he drove to job sites or supplier meetings. Back then, these trips represented everything I wanted to escape from: the dust, the heat, the narrow boundaries of a world built on concrete and manual labor. Now, driving my Tesla Model S through the same terrain, I saw opportunity where I'd once seen limitation. The construction sites visible from the highway weren't symbols of dead-end work anymore. They were potential clients, businesses that could benefit from the technology platform I'd spent 5 years perfecting. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was returning to the industry I'd tried so hard to leave, but returning as someone who could transform it rather than simply endure it. My phone buzzed with a text from David as I passed the exit for Casa Grande. Final documents signed by legal. Rodriguez Construction officially transfers to Tech Flow Solutions at 9 a.m. tomorrow. "You sure you want to handle this in person?" I voice texted back while maintaining my speed. Some conversations require eye contact. David had been skeptical about my decision to reveal my identity during the final signing ceremony. From a business perspective, the acquisition could proceed smoothly without any family drama. Rodriguez Construction would become another Tech Flow Solutions subsidiary, their operations would improve through software integration, and my father would never need to know that his disappointing daughter had become his new boss. But business wasn't the only consideration here. For 5 years, I'd built something extraordinary while my family continued to dismiss my accomplishments as hobbies or distractions. They'd created a narrative about my capabilities and my future that bore no resemblance to reality, and that narrative had shaped every interaction between us. Tomorrow, that narrative would crumble. I pulled into the parking lot of the Hampton Inn on Oracle Road just as the sun was setting behind the Tucson mountains. The hotel was nothing special, but it was clean and anonymous. Exactly what I needed for a night of preparation before the most important business meeting of my career. My room overlooked the pool area, where a few families were taking advantage of the cooling evening air. Children splashed in the chlorinated water while their parents relaxed in plastic lounge chairs, cold drinks sweating in the desert heat. The scene was peaceful and ordinary, a reminder that most people's lives continued without drama or confrontation. I ordered room service and spent the evening reviewing the acquisition documents one final time. Every page had been scrutinized by lawyers and business advisors, but I wanted to understand every clause and provision. Tomorrow's conversation would likely be emotional and chaotic, and I needed to remain grounded in facts and legal realities regardless of how my family reacted. The financial terms were straightforward. Tech Flow Solutions was paying $3 million for 100% ownership of Rodriguez Construction, plus additional performance bonuses tied to profitability improvements over 24 months. The price reflected fair market value for a construction company with Rodriguez's client base and operational history, though it was significantly higher than what they could have received from other potential buyers. More importantly, the terms were designed to preserve what my father had built, while modernizing operations to ensure long-term sustainability. Current employees would retain their positions with improved benefits packages. Existing client relationships would be maintained and strengthened through better project management capabilities. The Rodriguez Construction brand would continue operating independently, with TechFlow Solutions providing technological infrastructure and business development support. I'd structured the deal to honor my father's legacy while positioning the company for growth that wouldn't be possible under traditional management approaches. The employment provisions were particularly important to me. Uncle Tony would be promoted to Senior Operations Advisor with a significant salary increase. The crew leaders who'd trained me during high school summers would receive stock options that made them partial owners of the business they'd helped build. Even Marcus would retain his position as operations manager, though his responsibilities would be clearly defined and his performance would be measured against objective metrics. I wasn't acquiring Rodriguez Construction to punish anyone or settle old scores. I was acquiring it to prove that the technology solutions I'd developed could transform even the most traditional businesses when implemented thoughtfully and professionally. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in knowing that my father's financial security now depended on the software expertise he'd dismissed as worthless. My phone rang at 8:30. Uncle Tony's name appeared on the screen and I answered immediately. "Nat, I hope you don't mind me calling so late. I wanted to give you an update on tomorrow's meeting." "Of course. How's everyone feeling about the acquisition?" Tony's voice carried a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Your father's excited but nervous. This TechFlow deal is better than anything else we've seen, but he's worried about losing control of the business he built. Marcus is being Marcus, skeptical of any change and convinced he could have negotiated better terms. And my mother? Catherine's mostly worried about what this means for the family dynamic. She keeps asking if this acquisition will affect Marcus's career path or your father's retirement plans." I smiled at the familiar pattern. Even during a major business transition, my family's primary concern was how it would impact Marcus's future and my father's comfort. My own connection to the situation remained invisible to them. "Tony, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think my father would have considered my advice if I'd stayed in Tucson and worked for Rodriguez Construction full-time?" There was a long pause before Tony answered. "Honestly, probably not. Your father sees you as his little girl who's good with computers, not as a business professional who understands the construction industry. It's not fair, but it's how his mind works. So he had to lose control of his company before he'd consider that technology might be valuable? That's about the size of it, yeah." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Tony sharing details about Rodriguez Construction's current financial situation and operational challenges. The problems were exactly what I'd expected. Inefficient project scheduling, poor communication between crews and management, inconsistent material ordering processes, and manual record-keeping that made it impossible to track profitability in real time. These were all problems that TechFlow Solutions software could solve within 60 days of implementation. But they were also problems that could have been avoided entirely if my father had been willing to listen to suggestions from his own daughter 5 years earlier. After ending the call with Tony, I spent another hour reviewing the implementation timeline David and I had developed for Rodriguez Construction's technology integration. The plan was aggressive but achievable. Full software deployment within 6 weeks, staff training completed within 8 weeks, and measurable performance improvements visible within 12 weeks. The key was managing the transition carefully to avoid disrupting ongoing projects while introducing new systems. Rodriguez Construction currently had 7 active job sites, ranging from residential additions to commercial office renovations. Each project would need to be migrated to the TechFlow platform without creating delays or budget overruns that could damage client relationships. I'd personally oversee the integration process, working directly with crew leaders and project managers to ensure smooth adoption of new tools and procedures. It would mean spending several weeks in Tucson, working alongside people who'd known me since childhood but had never seen me as anything other than Richard Rodriguez's daughter who was good with computers. That dynamic was about to change dramatically. I woke up at 6 a.m., 2 hours before my alarm was scheduled to sound. The combination of excitement and anxiety had made deep sleep impossible, and I'd spent much of the night alternating between reviewing acquisition documents and staring at the ceiling while imagining different scenarios for how the morning's revelation might unfold. My father could react with anger, feeling deceived and manipulated by a daughter who'd hidden her success while he struggled to save his business. Marcus might feel threatened by the shift in family dynamics, particularly if he realized that his little sister now had authority over his career prospects. My mother would likely focus on the social implications, worried about how the situation would appear to friends and extended family. Or they might surprise me. Perhaps learning about my accomplishments would finally earn me the respect and recognition I'd been seeking since childhood. Maybe they'd be proud of what I'd built and excited about the opportunities that lay ahead for Rodriguez Construction under TechFlow Solutions ownership. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a charcoal gray business suit that projected professionalism without being intimidating. The goal was to appear successful and competent, not to overwhelm or intimidate people who were already anxious about their company's future. At 7:30, I drove to Rodriguez Construction's offices on the south side of Tucson. The building was exactly as I remembered it, a low-slung concrete structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sun like mirrors. The parking lot was already full of work trucks and personal vehicles, indicating that the crew was preparing for another busy day of active projects. I parked next to my father's red Chevrolet Silverado, the same truck he'd been driving since my sophomore year of high school. The familiar sight triggered a wave of memories. Riding to job sites as a teenager, learning to operate equipment under his patient instruction, listening to him explain the intricacies of construction contracts and client management. Those had been good memories, moments when my father shared his knowledge and experience without the dismissive attitude that characterized our recent interactions. Perhaps the acquisition would create opportunities to rebuild that relationship on more equal footing. David's rental car was already in the parking lot, along with a black sedan that likely belonged to the TechFlow legal team. Through the building's windows, I could see people moving around the conference room, setting up documents and adjusting chairs for the formal signing ceremony. I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, gathering my thoughts and preparing for what might be the most important conversation of my life. The acquisition papers were in my briefcase, along with implementation timelines and technology integration plans that would transform Rodriguez Construction's operations over the coming months. But more importantly, I was carrying 5 years of accumulated success and professional growth that my family had never acknowledged or celebrated. Today, that invisibility would end. At 8:50, I walked through the front door of Rodriguez Construction for the first time in 3 years. The lobby was exactly as I'd left it. Industrial carpet, metal furniture, and walls covered with photographs of completed projects. My father took pride in that photo gallery, and I recognized most of the buildings from my teenage years working on various crews. Residential homes, office complexes, retail spaces, and municipal buildings that represented thousands of hours of skilled labor and careful project management. Soon, those same types of projects would be managed using software systems I'd designed and developed. The receptionist, Maria Santos, looked up from her desk with surprise and delight. "Natalie, what are you doing here? Your father didn't mention you were coming to town." "I'm here for the business meeting," I said, giving her a warm hug. Maria had worked for Rodriguez Construction since before I was born, and she'd always treated me with genuine affection despite my family's complicated dynamics. "Are you going to be working here again? It would be wonderful to have you back." "Something like that," I replied, not wanting to explain the situation before my father had a chance to understand it himself. Maria gestured toward the conference room. "Everyone's already gathered for the big signing. Your father's been talking about this TechFlow deal for weeks. He's really excited about the partnership." Partnership. That was an interesting way to frame an acquisition, but it reflected the positive spin my father had put on the situation. From his perspective, Rodriguez Construction was entering into a collaborative relationship with a successful technology company, not being purchased by his disappointing daughter. The conference room was buzzing with quiet conversation when I approached the doorway. Through the glass walls, I could see my father and Marcus seated at one side of the large oak table, reviewing documents with their attorney. David was at the opposite end of the room, speaking quietly with 2 other men in expensive suits who were clearly part of the TechFlow legal team. Uncle Tony spotted me first. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw him glance between me and the TechFlow representatives with sudden understanding. Tony was the only family member who'd followed my career progress closely enough to recognize the significance of my presence at this meeting. I took a deep breath and opened the conference room door. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. My father looked up from his paperwork with confusion. Natalie, what are you doing here? This is a private business meeting. David stood up from his chair and walked over to greet me with a professional handshake. Richard, Marcus, I'd like you to meet my business partner and co-founder of TechFlow Solutions, Natalie Rodriguez, our Chief Technology Officer. The silence that followed was profound and absolute. My father's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Marcus blinked rapidly, as if trying to process information that didn't make sense. Even their attorney looked confused by the apparent family connection between the Rodriguez construction owners and the TechFlow Solutions leadership. Uncle Tony was the first to speak. Well, I'll be damned, he said quietly, a smile spreading across his weathered face. My father finally found his voice. This is some kind of joke. No joke, Dad. David and I founded TechFlow Solutions 5 years ago. We're here to finalize the acquisition of Rodriguez Construction. Marcus pushed back from the table and stood up abruptly. Wait, you're telling us that you own the company that's buying us out? I'm a 45% owner and co-founder, yes. The room erupted in overlapping conversations as family members and attorneys tried to understand the implications of this revelation. My father demanded explanations. Marcus peppered me with questions about when this had happened and why we hadn't been informed. The attorneys huddled together, confirming that the acquisition documents were still legally valid regardless of family relationships. Through it all, David remained calm and professional, occasionally clarifying business details while allowing me to handle the personal dynamics. We discussed this scenario extensively, and he understood that the family conversation needed to happen before we could proceed with finalizing the legal paperwork. Everyone, please sit down, I said finally, my voice carrying enough authority to cut through the chaos. I know this is unexpected, but I'd like to explain how we got here. My father slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his eyes never leaving my face. You've been lying to us for 5 years. I haven't been lying. I've been building a business while you assumed I was wasting my time playing with computers. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air like smoke from a construction site fire. It was the right question, and it deserved an honest answer. Because every time I tried to share my accomplishments, you dismissed them as hobbies or distractions. When I showed you software that could help Rodriguez Construction, you told me to stick to what I knew. When I explained that I was making money solving real problems for real businesses, you called it playing with toys. My father's face reddened, but he didn't interrupt. I stopped trying to earn your respect through explanation and started earning it through accomplishment. TechFlow Solutions has $31 million in annual revenue. We serve over 400 construction companies across the United States. Our software platform processes more than $1 billion in construction projects every year. Marcus spoke up. If you're so successful, why do you want to buy Rodriguez Construction? This is a small family business compared to what you're describing. It was a fair question, and it got to the heart of why this acquisition was about more than just business expansion. Because Rodriguez Construction represents everything I learned about the construction industry before I learned about technology. This business taught me to solve problems with careful planning and skilled execution. It showed me the value of honest work and client relationships built on trust and reliability. I gestured toward the photo gallery visible through the conference room windows. Every building in those pictures represents lessons that inform the software I've developed. TechFlow Solutions exists because I understood construction challenges from the inside, not because I read about them in business school textbooks. Uncle Tony nodded appreciatively. That makes sense. More importantly, I continued, Rodriguez Construction is struggling with problems that TechFlow Solutions can solve. Dad, you're losing money on projects because your scheduling systems can't adapt to unexpected delays. You're over-ordering materials because you can't track inventory in real time. You're losing competitive bids because you can't accurately estimate project timelines. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. These were all issues he'd been wrestling with for months, but he'd never discussed them openly with family members. Our software platform can eliminate those inefficiencies within 60 days of implementation. But beyond the operational improvements, this acquisition allows me to prove that technology and traditional construction expertise can work together instead of competing against each other. David stepped forward with a folder of documents. Perhaps we should review the specific terms of the acquisition so everyone understands what we're proposing. For the next hour, we walked through every aspect of the deal: the financial terms, the employment provisions, the operational changes, and the timeline for technology integration. David and the legal team answered questions about corporate structure and reporting relationships, while I explained how the software implementation would work and what changes employees could expect. My father asked detailed questions about profit-sharing arrangements and client relationship management. Marcus focused on his own role and responsibilities within the new organizational structure. Uncle Tony wanted to understand how the technology platform would affect day-to-day operations for crew leaders and field workers. Gradually, the initial shock gave way to practical discussions about business logistics and operational planning. The personal drama remained unresolved, but the professional aspects of the acquisition began to make sense to everyone involved. "I have one final question," my father said as we neared the end of the formal presentation. "Why didn't you just offer to help Rodriguez Construction instead of buying the whole company?" The question cut to the emotional core of the situation. My father was asking why I'd chosen ownership over partnership, control over collaboration. Because helping requires that the person being helped acknowledges they need assistance. You've never been willing to admit that Rodriguez Construction could benefit from technology solutions, even when those solutions were developed by your own daughter. My father flinched slightly, but he didn't dispute the characterization. This way, the improvements happen regardless of personal feelings or family dynamics. Rodriguez Construction gets the tools it needs to succeed, and TechFlow Solutions gets a showcase client that demonstrates our platform's effectiveness. And you get to prove that your disappointing daughter became more successful than anyone expected. The words were said without malice, but they carried the weight of 32 years of accumulated frustration and misunderstanding. I get to prove that dismissing someone's potential doesn't make their potential disappear. It just makes you miss the opportunity to be part of their success. The signing ceremony proceeded without additional drama, though the atmosphere remained tense and surreal. Documents were reviewed, signatures were obtained, and ownership of Rodriguez Construction officially transferred to TechFlow Solutions at exactly 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. As people began packing up their briefcases and preparing to leave, Uncle Tony approached me with a mixture of pride and amusement in his expression. "Your grandmother would have loved this," he said quietly. "She always said you were going to surprise everyone someday. I just wish it hadn't taken this long for the surprise to happen." Tony glanced toward my father, who was speaking quietly with the attorneys near the conference room door. Quote, "Give him time to process this. He's proud, but he's not stupid. Once he sees what you've built, he'll come around." I wasn't entirely convinced that reconciliation would be that simple, but I appreciated Tony's optimism. Marcus approached as Tony was leaving. His expression was complicated, carrying emotions I couldn't immediately identify. "Congratulations, I guess. This is definitely not what any of us expected." "Thank you. I hope we can work together effectively going forward." "About that?" Marcus said, lowering his voice. "Are you planning to fire me?" The question surprised me with its directness and vulnerability. Marcus had always projected confidence bordering on arrogance, but standing in the conference room where his little sister had just become his boss, he looked genuinely uncertain about his future. "I'm planning to help you become better at your job. Rodriguez Construction needs strong project management, and you have the client relationships and industry knowledge to be effective. You just need better tools and more systematic approaches to planning and execution. So I'm not being replaced? You're being supported. There's a difference." Marcus nodded slowly, though I could see him struggling to process the shift in our relationship dynamic. My father was the last person remaining in the conference room besides David and myself. He sat at the oak table staring at the acquisition documents as if they might reveal additional secrets or surprises. "Dad?" He looked up with an expression that mixed hurt, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "I don't understand how this happened. It happened because I never stopped working, even when you stopped believing in what I was working toward." We stared at each other across the table that had hosted thousands of Rodriguez Construction business meetings over the past 15 years. The same table where I'd sat as a teenager, listening to my father discuss projects and clients while treating my opinions as irrelevant distractions. Now I own the company, the building, and the table itself. What happens next? He asked finally. Next, we transform Rodriguez Construction into the most efficient and profitable construction company in Arizona. We implement software systems that eliminate waste and improve communication. We train your crews on tools that make their jobs easier and more precise. We grow the business beyond anything you imagined possible. And our family? That was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating all morning. The business aspects of the acquisition were straightforward, but the personal relationships remained complicated and unresolved. That depends on whether you're willing to see me differently than you have for the past 32 years. My father didn't answer immediately. He gathered the documents slowly, placed them in his briefcase, and stood up from the table with the careful movements of a man who'd spent decades doing physical labor. I need some time to think about all this. Take all the time you need. But Dad? He paused at the conference room door. Rodriguez Construction is going to succeed under TechFlow Solutions ownership. The question is whether you want to be part of that success or just a spectator to it. He left without responding, and I was alone in the conference room with David and the lingering scent of desert air drifting through the building's ventilation system. How do you think that went? David asked. I looked around the room that now belonged to my company, thinking about the conversation that had just concluded and the work that lay ahead. Better than I expected, but more complicated than I hoped. Family businesses usually are. Outside the conference room windows, I could see Rodriguez Construction employees returning from their morning break, preparing to resume work on projects that would now be managed using software I'd designed. In a few weeks, those same workers would be operating more efficiently than they'd ever imagined possible. But first, I had to prove that a disappointing daughter could transform her father's business without destroying what made it valuable in the first place. The implementation of TechFlow Solutions software at Rodriguez Construction began 3 days after the acquisition papers were signed. I arrived at the office complex at 6:30 in the morning, carrying 2 laptops and a tablet loaded with training materials. The parking lot was already half full, with work trucks and personal vehicles, indicating that the crew maintained the early start times that had been standard operating procedure for years. Walking through those familiar hallways felt surreal. The building that had intimidated me as a teenager now belonged to my company, but the people inside remained the same mix of experienced craftsmen and dedicated administrators who'd built Rodriguez Construction's reputation over 15 years. The challenge was introducing revolutionary changes to their daily routines without disrupting the relationships and work culture that made the business successful. Maria Santos greeted me at the reception desk with coffee and a knowing smile. "So you're the new boss," she said warmly. "I have to admit, I saw this coming years ago when you were always fixing our computer problems and suggesting better ways to organize project files." "You're one of the few people who did," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How is everyone adjusting to the news?" Maria's expression became more serious. Mixed reactions. Some of the older crew members are excited because they remember how smart you were as a kid. Others are nervous about working for someone they used to give piggyback rides to. And a few are skeptical about whether computer systems can really improve how we build things. The skepticism was expected and understandable. Construction workers took pride in their practical skills and hands-on expertise. Many had watched technology implementations fail at other companies, resulting in wasted time and frustrated employees who were forced to use systems that made their jobs harder rather than easier. My approach to the software rollout would need to address those concerns directly by demonstrating immediate, tangible benefits rather than abstract improvements in efficiency metrics. Uncle Tony appeared in the lobby wearing his standard work clothes and carrying a thermos of coffee that had probably been brewing since 5 in the morning. "Ready to revolutionize the construction industry?" he asked with mock seriousness. "Ready to make everyone's job easier and more profitable?" I corrected. "Revolution sounds dramatic. I'm aiming for practical improvement," Tony laughed. "Same difference, just better marketing." We walked through the building together, stopping at various offices and workstations, where I could observe current workflows and identify integration points for the new software. Rodriguez Construction operated using a combination of desktop computers, paper forms, and verbal communication that created multiple opportunities for miscommunication and data loss. Project schedules were maintained on wall calendars and whiteboard charts that couldn't be updated remotely or shared with subcontractors. Material orders were processed through phone calls and handwritten purchase orders that often contained errors or incomplete specifications. Time tracking relied on paper timesheets that crew leaders submitted weekly, making real-time labor cost analysis impossible. These inefficiencies had been tolerable when Rodriguez Construction was smaller and projects were less complex. But as the business had grown and construction projects had become more sophisticated, the manual systems had become bottlenecks that prevented optimal performance. TechFlow Solutions software would replace these disconnected processes with an integrated platform that provided real-time visibility into every aspect of project management, from initial bidding through final client invoicing. The first training session was scheduled for 7:30 in the main conference room, with attendance from all project managers, crew leaders, and administrative staff. I'd prepared a presentation that focused on practical demonstrations rather than technical explanations, showing exactly how the new tools would impact daily workflows. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a notebook and wearing an expression that mixed professional curiosity with personal awkwardness. Our relationship had always been complicated, but the recent revelation that his younger sister now owned the family business had added layers of complexity that neither of us knew how to navigate. "Good morning," he said formally, taking a seat near the front of the room. "Morning, Marcus. Thank you for being here." The other attendees filed in gradually, creating the kind of nervous energy that accompanied any significant workplace change. I recognized most faces from my teenage years working various crew positions, though many of the younger employees were unfamiliar. Rodriguez Construction had grown substantially since I'd left Tucson, adding specialized teams for electrical work, plumbing, and finish carpentry. Uncle Tony introduced me to the group with characteristic directness. "Everyone knows Natalie Rodriguez, Richard's daughter, who used to work summers with the framing crew. What you might not know is that she's now the co-founder and chief technology officer of TechFlow Solutions, the company that acquired Rodriguez Construction this week. She's here to train us on software that's going to make all our jobs easier and more profitable." A few hands went up immediately. "Are people going to get fired because of these computer systems?" asked Jose Hernandez, a crew leader who'd been with Rodriguez Construction since the beginning. "No," I answered clearly. "TechFlow Solutions acquired Rodriguez Construction because we want to grow the business, not shrink it. The software will eliminate time-consuming paperwork and reduce costly mistakes, but it won't replace skilled workers. If anything, improved efficiency should lead to more projects and more employment opportunities. What if we can't learn to use these new systems?" asked Linda Chen, the office manager who handled client communications and project billing. "The training is designed for people with varying levels of computer experience," I explained. "We'll start with basic functions and gradually introduce more advanced features as everyone becomes comfortable. Plus, I'll be here personally for the first month to provide hands-on support and answer questions." The presentation began with a demonstration of the project scheduling module. Instead of using abstract examples, I loaded actual data from Rodriguez Construction's current projects, showing how the software could track progress, identify potential delays, and automatically adjust timelines when circumstances changed. The transformation was immediately visible. Project information that currently required searching through multiple file folders and making several phone calls was now accessible through a single screen. Material delivery schedules that had to be manually coordinated with suppliers were automatically synchronized based on construction progress and weather forecasts. "This is the Westside Office Complex project," I explained, pointing to a Gantt chart displayed on the conference room's large monitor. "Under the current system, Marcus has to check with 3 different crew leaders, call 2 suppliers, and review weather reports to determine whether we're on schedule for next week's concrete pour. Using TechFlow software, All that information is automatically compiled and updated in real time. Marcus leaned forward, studying the screen intently. How accurate is the weather integration? We use the same meteorological data that airports rely on for flight planning. 7-day forecasts are typically accurate within a 2-degree margin, and the system automatically suggests schedule adjustments based on temperature and precipitation projections. Several crew leaders exchanged impressed glances. Weather delays were a constant source of frustration and unexpected costs in construction work, and any tool that could help anticipate and minimize those disruptions would provide immediate value. The material management demonstration generated even more enthusiasm. I showed how the software could track inventory levels across multiple job sites, automatically reorder supplies when stock levels dropped below predetermined thresholds, and optimize delivery schedules to minimize transportation costs. Right now, we sometimes have too much lumber sitting at one site while another site runs short, observed Frank Morrison, who supervised the framing crews. This system could prevent that kind of waste? Exactly. The software tracks material consumption rates for different types of projects and adjusts ordering patterns accordingly. It also coordinates with suppliers to consolidate deliveries when multiple job sites need similar materials. The questions continued throughout the 2-hour session, covering everything from mobile access for field workers to integration with existing accounting systems. The initial skepticism gradually gave way to genuine interest, as people began understanding how the technology could solve problems they encountered daily. But the most significant moment came when my father arrived halfway through the presentation. Richard Rodriguez entered the conference room quietly, carrying his usual morning coffee and wearing work clothes that suggested he'd already visited at least one job site. He took an empty chair near the back of the room and listened without interrupting as I continued explaining the software's capabilities. Having my father observe the training session added a layer of tension that was immediately noticeable to everyone present. This was the first time since the acquisition announcement that he'd witnessed me in a professional role, demonstrating expertise he'd never acknowledged or valued. I continued the presentation without changing my approach or acknowledging the additional pressure his presence created. The software demonstration spoke for itself, and the questions from his employees confirmed that TechFlow Solutions offered genuine improvements to Rodriguez Construction's operations. When the formal session ended, most attendees remained in the conference room, clustering around the demonstration computer to explore the software interface and ask follow-up questions about specific features. The enthusiasm was encouraging, particularly from crew leaders who would be responsible for implementing new procedures with their teams. My father approached the front of the room as the crowd was dispersing. "Can we talk privately?" Of course. We walked to his office, a space I'd rarely entered during my years working for Rodriguez Construction. The room reflected his practical approach to business management: metal desk, file cabinets, and walls covered with project photographs and construction industry certifications. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk. The formal arrangement felt awkward given our family relationship, but it seemed appropriate for the conversation we needed to have. "That was impressive," he said without preamble. "Thank you. I mean it. I've been skeptical about computer systems because most of the ones I've seen were complicated and expensive, without providing obvious benefits. But what you demonstrated this morning would solve real problems we deal with every day." The admission surprised me with its directness and humility. My father had built Rodriguez Construction through careful observation and practical problem-solving, and he was apparently capable of recognizing valuable tools regardless of their source. The software was designed specifically for companies like Rodriguez Construction, I explained. Every feature addresses challenges I encountered while working in the field and observing construction operations. "Why didn't you show me this years ago?" The question contained genuine curiosity rather than accusation, which made it easier to answer honestly. "Because you weren't ready to see it. Every time I suggested technology solutions, you responded as if I was criticizing your methods rather than offering improvements. I learned that demonstrating success was more effective than explaining possibilities." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair. I've always been suspicious of people who try to fix things that aren't obviously broken. But Rodriguez Construction was having problems. Project delays, cost overruns, communication breakdowns between crews and management. The problems weren't obvious because they'd developed gradually over several years. And you saw them because you were working in the field while also learning about technology solutions. Exactly. I understood the problems from experience and could envision solutions through software development. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, a rarity in our relationship. The conversation felt more honest and respectful than any we'd shared since my teenage years. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now we implement the software across all Rodriguez construction operations. Full deployment will take about 6 weeks, with training continuing throughout that period. You'll start seeing measurable improvements in efficiency and profitability within 2 months. And after that? After that, we expand." Rodriguez Construction becomes a showcase client for TechFlow solutions, demonstrating how traditional construction companies can modernize without losing what makes them successful. We use that success to attract larger projects and more sophisticated clients. My father's expression grew thoughtful. "How much larger?" I pulled out my tablet and opened a file containing market analysis data that David and I had compiled during our acquisition research. The Arizona construction market is projected to grow by 35% over the next 5 years, driven by population migration and commercial development. With improved operational efficiency, Rodriguez Construction could capture a disproportionate share of that growth. The financial projections were compelling. Under current operations, Rodriguez Construction generated approximately $2 million in annual revenue, with profit margins around 8%. With TechFlow software optimization, those same operations could handle 40% more projects while improving profit margins to 15%. More importantly, the operational improvements would position Rodriguez Construction to compete for larger commercial projects that currently went to companies with more sophisticated management systems. We could be generating $4 million annually within 3 years, I continued, with profit margins that would make Rodriguez Construction one of the most successful construction companies in southern Arizona. My father studied the projections carefully, asking detailed questions about market assumptions and competitive analysis. His business instincts remained sharp, and he understood that growth opportunities came with corresponding risks and challenges. "This assumes we can maintain quality while increasing volume," he observed. "The software actually helps maintain quality by standardizing procedures and providing better oversight of subcontractor work. Crew leaders get real-time alerts when projects deviate from specifications, and project managers can identify potential problems before they become expensive mistakes." "What about hiring additional workers?" "Good construction people are hard to find. That's where the technology provides the biggest advantage. New employees can be productive faster because they're working with systems that provide clear guidance and immediate feedback. Experienced workers become more efficient because they're not wasting time on paperwork and communication delays." The conversation continued for another hour, covering implementation timelines, employee training schedules, and financial projections for the coming fiscal year. My father's questions became increasingly specific and technical, indicating genuine engagement with the strategic planning process. But the most significant moment came when he asked about my own role going forward. "Will you be staying in Tucson to oversee the implementation?" "For the next month, yes. After that, I'll be dividing my time between Austin and Tucson, probably spending 2 weeks per month here until the integration is complete." "And then?" "That depends on how successful the implementation is and whether there are opportunities for additional collaboration between TechFlow Solutions and Rodriguez Construction." My father leaned back in his chair, considering implications I couldn't immediately identify. "Natalie, I owe you an apology." The statement was unexpected and delivered with the kind of sincerity that made argument impossible. "For what?" "For not taking you seriously when you tried to show me what you were capable of. For treating your accomplishments like hobbies, instead of recognizing them as professional achievements. For making you feel like you had to prove yourself to strangers before I'd acknowledge your abilities." The apology addressed grievances I'd been carrying for years, but hearing it spoken aloud felt strange rather than satisfying. Perhaps because the vindication had come through business success rather than family recognition, the emotional impact was different than I'd expected. "Thank you for saying that." I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm grateful that you're using your success to help Rodriguez Construction instead of just walking away from everything I've created. This business raised me as much as you did. It taught me about problem-solving, client relationships, and the value of skilled work. I'm not helping Rodriguez Construction, despite my history here. I am helping it because of my history here." Quote. My father smiled for the first time since learning about the acquisition. Your grandmother would have enjoyed watching you explain technology to a room full of skeptical construction workers. She probably would have understood the software better than most of them. Definitely, she was always good with new ideas, as long as they solved real problems. The mention of my grandmother shifted the conversation toward family memories and shared experiences that had been overshadowed by recent tensions. We talked about her practical wisdom, her ability to see potential in situations that seemed hopeless, and her belief that solutions often came from unexpected sources. She used to say that the best ideas came from people who understood problems from the bottom up. My father reflected, "I guess that describes what you've done with TechFlow Solutions. It describes what Rodriguez Construction taught me to do." When I finally left his office, the relationship between us felt different than it had in years. Not completely repaired. That would take time and continued positive interactions, but fundamentally shifted toward mutual respect and shared goals. The software implementation proceeded rapidly over the following weeks. Individual training sessions with crew leaders and project managers revealed that most employees adapted to the new systems more quickly than anticipated. The interface was intuitive enough that workers with minimal computer experience could perform basic functions within a few days of initial training. More importantly, the immediate benefits were visible and measurable. Project scheduling became more accurate, material waste decreased significantly, and communication between different crews improved dramatically. The cost savings were apparent within 2 weeks of full deployment. But the real test came when Rodriguez Construction received its first major project bid request since the TechFlow acquisition. The Tucson Medical Center expansion project represented the largest potential contract in Rodriguez Construction's history, a $40 million renovation and addition that would require coordination between multiple specialized subcontractors over 18 months. Under the old management systems, a project of this scope would have been beyond Rodriguez Construction's capabilities. With TechFlow software providing comprehensive project management tools, the bid became not only feasible but competitive. I worked directly with Marcus and Uncle Tony to develop the proposal, using software analytics to optimize material ordering schedules, labor allocation plans, and subcontractor coordination timelines. The resulting bid was detailed, precise, and demonstrated a level of operational sophistication that impressed the medical center's project selection committee. When Rodriguez Construction was awarded the contract, beating out 3 larger competitors, the victory represented more than just business success. It validated the entire premise behind the TechFlow acquisition and demonstrated that technology integration could transform a traditional construction company's competitive position. The celebration at Rodriguez Construction felt different than any I'd experienced during my teenage years working there. Instead of being excluded from important conversations or treated as a peripheral observer, I was recognized as the person whose expertise had made the victory possible. My father's pride was obvious and unqualified. Marcus acknowledged that the bid would have been impossible without the TechFlow's software and my direct involvement in proposal development. Even the crew leaders who'd initially been skeptical about computer systems recognized that the medical center project would provide stable employment and professional growth opportunities for months to come. But the most meaningful recognition came from Uncle Tony, who pulled me aside after the celebration dinner. "Your grandmother was right about you," he said simply. "What did she used to say? That you saw solutions where other people saw problems, and that someday everyone else would catch up to what you'd been seeing all along." Standing in the Rodriguez Construction office that now belonged to my company, surrounded by people who finally understood what I'd been working toward, I realized that the acquisition had achieved something more valuable than financial return or professional vindication. It had restored connections that I'd thought were permanently damaged by years of dismissal and misunderstanding. The technology that had initially divided me from my family had ultimately become the bridge that brought us back together. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it no longer felt bitter. The following month brought additional validation, as Rodriguez Construction's performance metrics improved across every measurable category. Project completion times decreased by an average of 18%, material costs dropped by 12%, and client satisfaction scores reached their highest levels in company history. More importantly, employee morale improved as workers discovered that the new systems made their jobs easier rather than more complicated. The software eliminated much of the paperwork and administrative tasks that had previously consumed time and energy that could be devoted to actual construction work. Word of Rodriguez Construction's transformation spread through the Arizona construction industry, generating inquiries from other companies interested in TechFlow Solutions software. David flew in from Austin to meet with potential clients, and we began developing expansion plans that would establish Tucson as a regional hub for construction technology services. The success created opportunities I hadn't anticipated when I first conceived the acquisition. Instead of simply proving that my software could improve construction operations, Rodriguez Construction had become a laboratory for developing additional features and capabilities that would benefit the entire TechFlow Solutions client base. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual restoration of my relationship with my father. Richard began attending TechFlow Solutions strategy meetings, contributing insights about construction industry trends and client needs that informed our product development roadmap. His practical experience complemented my technical expertise, creating a partnership that strengthened both companies. The dynamic between us shifted from parent-child authority to professional collaboration. He stopped treating my opinions as suggestions from an inexperienced daughter and started engaging with them as insights from a successful business owner. I stopped seeking his approval for my accomplishments and started valuing his practical wisdom about industry relationships and operational challenges. The change was gradual and sometimes awkward, but it was genuine and sustainable. One evening in late November, as we were reviewing quarterly performance reports in his office, my father made an observation that captured the transformation. "You know, I always thought you were running away from construction when you moved to Austin. I thought so too at first. But you were actually running toward a way to come back and fix what was broken. Maybe. Or maybe I was running toward becoming someone you could respect." My father set down the financial reports and looked at me directly. "I should have respected you long before you became successful. Respect isn't something that has to be earned through accomplishment. It's something that should be given because you're my daughter and you've always worked hard and treated people well." "Thank you for saying that. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I don't want you to think that my pride in your success is conditional on continued business growth. I'm proud of who you are, not just what you've achieved." The conversation represented a level of emotional honesty that had been absent from our relationship for years. But it also highlighted how much both of us had changed during the process of working together professionally. Success had given me the confidence to engage with my father as an equal, rather than seeking his approval as a child. Experience had taught him to recognize expertise regardless of its source, and to value results over preconceptions. The combination created space for a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than traditional family hierarchy. As 2023 drew to a close, Rodriguez Construction had exceeded all performance projections and established itself as one of the most technologically advanced construction companies in Arizona. TechFlow Solutions had gained national attention as an example of successful technology integration in traditional industries. But the most important achievement was personal, rather than professional. I had returned to Tucson not as the disappointing daughter who couldn't find her place in the family business, but as the successful entrepreneur who had transformed that business into something better than anyone had imagined possible. The vindication was complete, but it no longer felt necessary. What mattered now was building on the foundation we'd established, continuing to grow both companies while maintaining the relationships that made success meaningful. The story wasn't ending, it was just beginning a new chapter. The phone call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning in February, while I was reviewing quarterly financial reports in my Austin office. David knocked on my door and entered with an expression that mixed excitement with concern. Phoenix Development Group just filed a lawsuit against Rodriguez Construction, he announced without preamble. I looked up from my laptop screen, immediately alert. Phoenix Development Group was the same company that had offered to acquire Rodriguez Construction before our TechFlow Solutions purchase. the deal that would have stripped the business for parts and eliminated most of the workforce. What's the basis for their lawsuit? David handed me a folder containing legal documents that had been delivered by courier 20 minutes earlier. They're claiming tortious interference with business relations, alleging that our acquisition prevented them from completing a legitimate business transaction. I scanned the complaint quickly, my stomach tightening as I read the allegations. Phoenix Development Group was seeking $15 million in damages, claiming that TechFlow Solutions had deliberately sabotaged their negotiations with Rodriguez Construction through deceptive practices and undisclosed conflicts of interest. More concerning was their assertion that the acquisition had been structured to defraud creditors and manipulate asset valuations through family relationships and insider knowledge. This is complete fabrication, I said, setting down the documents. They never had a binding agreement with Rodriguez Construction, and our acquisition was conducted through standard legal procedures with independent valuations. I know that, and you know that, but they're banking on the optics being problematic. A daughter secretly acquiring her father's failing business looks suspicious to people who don't understand the full context. David's concern was justified. The lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was about credibility. Phoenix Development Group was attempting to undermine TechFlow Solutions' reputation by characterizing our most visible success story as a family favoritism scheme rather than a legitimate business transformation. If the allegations gained traction in the business community, the damage to our company's reputation could be devastating. Construction industry clients who trusted TechFlow Solutions based on the Rodriguez Construction case study might begin questioning whether our results were genuine or artificially inflated through insider advantages. We need to respond aggressively, I decided, both legally and publicly. This isn't just about defending the acquisition, it's about protecting everything we've built. David nodded. I've already contacted our attorneys, and they're preparing a motion to dismiss based on lack of merit. But they're also recommending that we compile comprehensive documentation of Rodriguez Construction's actual performance improvements since the acquisition. Performance documentation isn't enough. We need to expose Phoenix Development Group's real motivations and demonstrate that their lawsuit is retaliation for losing a business deal they never deserved to win. The next few hours were spent in crisis management mode. Our legal team began preparing defensive motions while our public relations firm developed messaging strategies to counter negative media coverage. David coordinated with TechFlow Solutions clients to ensure they understood our position and remained confident in our services. I focused on gathering evidence that would demolish Phoenix Development Group's credibility. The research revealed exactly what I'd suspected. Phoenix Development Group had a history of acquiring struggling construction companies, selling off their assets, and abandoning their employees. Their business model was predatory rather than supportive, designed to extract value from distressed businesses rather than improving their operations. More importantly, their financial projections for Rodriguez Construction had been unrealistic and misleading. They'd promised my father purchase terms that couldn't possibly be fulfilled based on their actual financial resources and historical acquisition patterns. TechFlow Solutions, by contrast, had delivered exactly what we'd promised. Rodriguez Construction's revenue had increased by 42%, profit margins had improved by nearly double, and employment had expanded rather than contracted. Every commitment made during the acquisition process had been honored or exceeded. The evidence was overwhelming, but presenting it effectively would require more than legal briefs and financial statements. We needed to demonstrate the human impact of both approaches, what Phoenix Development Group would have destroyed versus what TechFlow Solutions had created. That's when I decided to organize a public forum. The Arizona Construction Industry Association agreed to host a special meeting focused on technology integration and business transformation in traditional industries. The event would provide an opportunity to present our side of the story to industry professionals who understood construction business dynamics and could evaluate our claims based on practical experience. More importantly, it would give Rodriguez Construction employees an opportunity to speak directly about how the TechFlow acquisition had affected their lives and careers. My father was initially skeptical about the public forum approach. "This feels like we're defending ourselves instead of letting our work speak for itself," he observed during a phone conversation. "Sometimes work needs a voice," I replied. Phoenix Development Group is trying to discredit our results by questioning our motivations. The best way to counter that is by letting people see the actual results for themselves. What if the forum backfires? What if people side with Phoenix Development Group's version of events? Then we'll deal with that. But I'd rather have an honest conversation about what we've accomplished than let lies go unchallenged. The forum was scheduled for the following Friday at the Phoenix Convention Center, with attendance expected from construction company owners, industry suppliers, and business journalists. I spent the week preparing presentations that documented Rodriguez Construction's transformation through objective metrics and employee testimonials. But I also prepared for something more personal, a direct confrontation with the executives from Phoenix Development Group, who would likely attend the forum to defend their lawsuit and challenge our narrative. Marcus flew in from Tucson to help with the presentation, bringing updated financial reports that showed Rodriguez Construction's continued growth throughout the winter months. His transformation over the past year had been remarkable, from skeptical family member to committed advocate for the technology integration that had revolutionized his daily work. I've been thinking about what you said regarding defending ourselves versus letting work speak for itself, he mentioned while we reviewed presentation slides in my hotel room. What conclusion did you reach? That sometimes the work gets misrepresented if you don't speak for it. Phoenix Development Group is telling a story about our acquisition that has nothing to do with what actually happened or what the results have been. Marcus was right. The public narrative around business acquisitions often focused on financial engineering and strategic maneuvering, rather than operational improvements and human outcomes. Phoenix Development Group was exploiting that tendency by characterizing our success as manipulation, rather than genuine transformation. The forum would provide an opportunity to correct that mischaracterization, through direct testimony from people who'd experienced the changes firsthand. The Phoenix Convention Center was packed beyond capacity when I arrived Friday morning. The construction industry was apparently hungry for discussions about technology integration and business modernization, topics that had become increasingly relevant as traditional companies struggled to compete with more sophisticated competitors. Phoenix Development Group was represented by their CEO, Michael Harrison, and their Chief Financial Officer, Sandra Wu. I recognized Harrison from industry publications, a man in his 50s who'd built his reputation through aggressive acquisition strategies and cost-cutting measures that prioritized short-term profits over long-term sustainability. The forum began with opening statements from both sides. Harrison spoke first, presenting Phoenix Development Group's position with polished confidence and carefully crafted talking points about market fairness and ethical business practices. The Rodriguez Construction acquisition represents a troubling trend toward insider dealing and market manipulation. Quote, he argued, when family relationships are used to circumvent competitive bidding processes, it undermines the integrity of our entire industry. His presentation was professionally delivered and superficially compelling, focusing on abstract principles rather than specific outcomes. He portrayed TechFlow Solutions as opportunistic outsiders who'd exploited family connections to acquire valuable assets at below-market prices. But Harrison made a critical error. He spent so much time attacking our motivations that he failed to address our results. When my turn came, I opened with a simple question directed to the audience. How many people here have visited Rodriguez Construction's offices or job sites since our acquisition last October? About 30 hands went up scattered throughout the auditorium. What did you observe? The responses came from contractors who'd worked as subcontractors on Rodriguez Construction projects, suppliers who'd noticed changes in ordering patterns and payment procedures, and competitors who'd lost bids to Rodriguez Construction's improved efficiency. Their scheduling is incredibly precise now, called out Janet Martinez, who owned a plumbing company. We used to have problems with coordination delays, but their project management has become seamless. Their material waste has dropped dramatically, added Tom Chen, a lumber supplier. They're ordering exactly what they need when they need it, which indicates much better planning and oversight. They're completing projects ahead of schedule and under budget consistently, observed Lisa Rodriguez, who managed a competing construction firm. Whatever they're doing differently is working exceptionally well. These testimonials came from industry professionals who had no financial interest in defending TechFlow Solutions or Rodriguez Construction. Their observations were based on direct business interactions and measurable outcomes, rather than abstract theories about market dynamics. I continued the presentation by displaying concrete performance metrics that documented Rodriguez Construction's transformation. Revenue growth, profit margin improvements, employee retention rates, client satisfaction scores, and project completion statistics that painted an unambiguous picture of business success. Phoenix Development Group's lawsuit claims that our acquisition was designed to defraud creditors and manipulate asset values. I explained to the audience. But the evidence shows exactly the opposite. Rodriguez Construction is now more profitable, more efficient, and more valuable than it was before the acquisition. Harrison attempted to interrupt with objections about presentation format and time limitations. But the forum moderator reminded him that he'd have equal opportunity to respond during the question and answer session. The most powerful moment came when Uncle Tony took the microphone to speak on behalf of Rodriguez Construction employees. "I've worked in construction for 38 years, he began, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "I've seen companies bought and sold, workers laid off when new management wanted to cut costs, and family businesses destroyed by people who saw them as nothing more than asset portfolios." The auditorium was completely silent as Tony continued. Phoenix Development Group offered to buy Rodriguez Construction for 60 cents on the dollar, with plans to eliminate half our workforce within 6 months. They saw a struggling business that could be stripped for parts and discarded. TechFlow Solutions saw a business that could be improved through better systems and more effective management. They've invested in our success rather than profiting from our failure. Tony's testimony was followed by statements from crew leaders, project managers, and administrative staff who described specific ways their jobs had improved under TechFlow ownership: better tools, clearer communication, more predictable schedules, and higher wages funded by increased profitability. The contrast between employee perspectives and Phoenix Development Group's legal allegations was stark and undeniable. When Harrison rose for his rebuttal, he faced an audience that had heard detailed accounts of actual business transformation from people who'd experienced it directly. His abstract arguments about market fairness and ethical business practices sounded hollow and theoretical compared to concrete testimonials about improved working conditions and business performance. "The issue isn't whether Rodriguez Construction has become more successful," Harrison insisted. "The issue is whether that success was achieved through legitimate business practices or through insider advantages that gave TechFlow Solutions an unfair competitive advantage." It was exactly the wrong argument to make in front of an audience of construction industry professionals who valued practical results over procedural purity. Janet Martinez raised her hand during the question and answer session. "Mr. Harrison, can you explain how Phoenix Development Group would have improved Rodriguez Construction's operations?" Harrison's answer revealed the fundamental weakness in his position. Phoenix Development Group specializes in optimizing asset utilization and operational efficiency through proven restructuring methodologies. "That's a lot of words that don't mean anything," Janet replied bluntly. TechFlow Solutions implemented specific software systems that solved specific problems we'd been struggling with for years. What specific improvements would Phoenix Development Group have made? Harrison couldn't provide a substantive answer because Phoenix Development Group's business model wasn't based on improvement, it was based on extraction. They acquired struggling companies to harvest their assets, not to enhance their capabilities. The forum's final segment focused on broader industry trends and the role of technology in construction business modernization. Multiple speakers addressed the challenges that traditional companies faced when attempting to integrate new systems and processes, emphasizing the importance of understanding industry culture and operational realities. My father, who'd been quietly observing from the audience, stood up during the final question period. "I'd like to address something that Mr. Harrison said about family relationships and insider dealing." Quote, he announced. The auditorium tensed with anticipation. This was the first time Richard Rodriguez had spoken publicly about the acquisition, and his perspective carried unique weight as the person who'd made the decision to sell Rodriguez Construction. "My daughter Natalie didn't approach me about acquiring Rodriguez Construction," he said clearly. "I had no idea she owned TechFlow Solutions until the day we signed the acquisition papers." The negotiations were conducted entirely through attorneys and business representatives. The admission surprised many audience members who'd assumed the acquisition had been arranged through family discussions and insider knowledge. Phoenix Development Group offered to buy my company for 40% less than what TechFlow Solutions paid, with plans to fire half my employees and sell off our equipment. TechFlow Solutions offered fair market value and committed to growing the business rather than dismantling it. My father's voice grew stronger as he continued. The results speak for themselves. Rodriguez Construction is now more successful than it's ever been. Our employees are better paid and more secure, and our clients receive better service than we could provide under the old management systems. Mr. Harrison can talk about market fairness and ethical business practices, but I know the difference between someone who wants to build something and someone who wants to tear it down. Phoenix Development Group wanted to tear down what I'd spent 15 years building. TechFlow Solutions wanted to make it better. The standing ovation that followed my father's statement lasted nearly 3 minutes. Harrison's attempts to respond were drowned out by applause from an audience that had heard enough to make their own judgments about the legitimacy of Phoenix Development Group's lawsuit. The forum concluded with expressions of support from industry leaders and commitments from multiple construction companies to explore TechFlow Solutions services for their own operations. The public relations victory was complete and overwhelming. But the legal battle was just beginning. Phoenix Development Group doubled down on their lawsuit following the forum, adding additional allegations about securities fraud and racketeering that were clearly designed to escalate the dispute and increase settlement pressure. Their attorneys filed motions for expedited discovery and asset freezing orders that could have paralyzed TechFlow Solutions operations while the case proceeded through the courts. The escalation confirmed what I'd suspected from the beginning. Phoenix Development Group wasn't primarily interested in monetary damages. They wanted to destroy TechFlow Solutions' reputation and eliminate us as a competitor in the construction technology marketplace. David and I spent the following week developing a comprehensive counterattack strategy that would expose Phoenix Development Group's predatory business practices while demonstrating the legitimacy of our acquisition and the authenticity of our results. The research revealed even more damaging information than I'd initially discovered. Phoenix Development Group had been investigated by state regulatory agencies in 3 different states for fraudulent business practices. They defaulted on acquisition financing agreements with 2 different banks. Most importantly, they'd never had the financial resources necessary to complete the Rodriguez Construction purchase they'd proposed. Their offer to acquire Rodriguez Construction had been a fraud from the beginning, designed to prevent other buyers from entering the market while Phoenix Development Group arranged financing they couldn't actually obtain. The countersuit we filed was devastating in its scope and specificity. We accused Phoenix Development Group of attempted fraud, market manipulation, and abuse of legal process. We demanded $30 million in damages plus punitive penalties that could potentially bankrupt their entire operation. More importantly, we requested immediate sanctions against their attorneys for filing frivolous claims and pursuing litigation in bad faith. The media coverage of our countersuit was extensive and uniformly supportive of TechFlow Solutions. Business journalists who investigated the underlying facts discovered the same pattern of predatory behavior that our research had revealed. Phoenix Development Group's reputation in the construction industry collapsed within days of our filing. But Michael Harrison wasn't finished fighting. The personal attack came on a Thursday evening, while I was working late in the Austin office. David had left for the day, and most of the staff had gone home, leaving me alone with quarterly reports and legal briefs that required careful review. My phone rang at 8:30. Harrison's name appeared on the caller ID. "This is Natalie Rodriguez." "You've made a serious mistake," Harrison said without identifying himself or offering any pleasantries. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "You know exactly who this is. And you know that pursuing your countersuit is going to expose information about your family that you'd prefer to keep private." The threat was unmistakable and surprisingly direct. Harrison was apparently desperate enough to abandon legal strategies in favor of personal intimidation. "What information are you referring to?" Your father's financial problems go deeper than anyone realizes. Rodriguez Construction has been insolvent for 18 months, and your acquisition was designed to help him avoid bankruptcy and creditor lawsuits. When that information becomes public, your reputation for business ethics will be destroyed. The accusation was false, but it revealed Phoenix Development Group's next tactical approach. They intended to shift focus from their own business practices to alleged irregularities in Rodriguez Construction's financial condition prior to our acquisition. Quote, "If you have evidence of financial irregularities, you should present it to the court, rather than making anonymous phone calls," I replied calmly. "This doesn't have to become uglier than it already is," Harrison continued. "Withdraw your countersuit and agree to a confidential settlement of our original claims. We'll both walk away and pretend this never happened. That's not going to happen. Then you'll live with the consequences." Harrison ended the call abruptly, leaving me alone in the darkened office with the realization that Phoenix Development Group was prepared to escalate beyond legal remedies and professional business disputes. I immediately called David and our security consultant to report the threatening phone call and request additional protective measures for key TechFlow Solutions personnel. I also contacted our attorneys to document the attempted intimidation and explore legal remedies for harassment. But I didn't call my family. The decision was deliberate and strategic. Harrison's threats were designed to create fear and uncertainty that would pressure me into settlement negotiations. Involving my father and other family members in those concerns would only amplify the psychological impact of the intimidation tactics. Instead, I used the threats as motivation to accelerate our legal offensive against Phoenix Development Group. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Linda Chen, the former office manager at Rodriguez Construction, called me on Friday morning with information she'd remembered about Phoenix Development Group's original acquisition proposal. "I was cleaning out old files yesterday and found the folder from their initial contact last year," she explained. "There's something strange about their financial documentation that I didn't notice at the time." "What kind of strange?" "The bank letters they provided as proof of financing capacity were dated after their acquisition proposal was submitted. It looks like they created fake financial documentation to support a bid they didn't have the resources to complete." The discovery was explosive. If Phoenix Development Group had submitted fraudulent financial documentation during their original acquisition attempt, their entire lawsuit could be characterized as an effort to cover up their own criminal behavior. Linda agreed to testify about the documentation discrepancies, and our forensic accountants began analyzing the financial records Phoenix Development Group had submitted during their negotiations with Rodriguez Construction. The analysis confirmed Linda's suspicions. Multiple documents contained date irregularities, signature inconsistencies, and financial projections that didn't align with Phoenix Development Group's actual asset portfolio or credit capacity. Phoenix Development Group had never had the ability to acquire Rodriguez Construction, and they'd known it from the beginning. Armed with evidence of document fraud and attempted acquisition manipulation, our attorneys filed an emergency motion requesting immediate dismissal of Phoenix Development Group's lawsuit and criminal referral for their fraudulent business practices. The motion was granted within 72 hours. Federal prosecutors announced their intention to investigate Phoenix Development Group for mail fraud, wire fraud, and attempted securities manipulation. The FBI executed search warrants at their offices in Phoenix and Denver, seizing financial records and communication files that would support criminal charges. Michael Harrison was arrested at his home on Tuesday morning. The vindication was swift and complete, but it came at a personal cost I hadn't anticipated. The stress of fighting the lawsuit while managing TechFlow Solutions' growth had taken a toll on my health and my relationships. I'd been working 16-hour days for months, neglecting friendships and family connections while obsessing over legal strategies and defensive preparations. More concerning was the realization that success had made me a target for people who saw my accomplishments as threats to their own interests. Phoenix Development Group wouldn't be the last company to challenge TechFlow Solutions through legal manipulation or personal intimidation. Building a business meant accepting responsibility for protecting not just financial assets, but also the people whose livelihoods depended on continued success. That responsibility was heavier and more complex than I'd understood when David and I first started TechFlow Solutions. But it was also the foundation for sustainable growth and meaningful impact. The legal victory over Phoenix Development Group established TechFlow Solutions as a formidable player in the construction technology marketplace, while demonstrating our commitment to ethical business practices and authentic results. Industry respect that had been built through Rodriguez Construction's transformation was now reinforced through successful defense against predatory competitors. More importantly, the experience had strengthened relationships within both companies. Rodriguez Construction employees had witnessed firsthand how TechFlow Solutions would fight to protect their interests and preserve their livelihoods. TechFlow Solutions staff had seen that our leadership could navigate serious challenges without compromising the values that defined our corporate culture. The foundation was solid for whatever challenges lay ahead. As winter gave way to spring in Austin, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that dinner table confrontation in Tucson, when I'd revealed the acquisition papers to my unsuspecting family. The journey from dismissed daughter to successful entrepreneur had been longer and more complicated than any business plan could have predicted. But perhaps that was the nature of all meaningful transformation. It required patience, persistence, and willingness to defend hard-won progress against people who preferred the status quo. I was ready for whatever came next. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the TechFlow Solutions headquarters in Austin as I stood before the conference room table where it all began. 2 years had passed since that tense family dinner in Tucson, when I'd slid acquisition papers across a different table, watching my father's face transform from dismissive confidence to stunned disbelief. Now, preparing for the most important board meeting in our company's history, I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed. David knocked on the conference room door, carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents representing our next major expansion. "The investors are here," he announced with barely contained excitement. Goldman Sachs, Andreessen Horowitz, and Kleiner Perkins all confirmed attendance. Today's meeting would determine whether TechFlow Solutions accepted a $150 million investment that would value our company at $800 million, transforming us from a successful regional business into a major player in the national construction technology market. The growth trajectory had been extraordinary. Following our victory over Phoenix Development Group, TechFlow Solutions had attracted attention from construction companies across the United States, seeking similar operational transformations. Our client base had expanded from 400 companies to over 2,000, with annual revenue growing from $31 million to $97 million. Rodriguez Construction had become our flagship showcase, demonstrating not just software capabilities, but also the human impact of thoughtful technology integration. My father's company now employed 68 people, compared to 32 before the acquisition, and their annual revenue had increased to $6.4 million, while maintaining the highest client satisfaction ratings in Arizona. But perhaps the most significant transformation had been personal, rather than professional. The relationship between my family and me had evolved from mutual disappointment to genuine partnership and respect. My father attended monthly TechFlow Solutions strategy meetings, contributing construction industry insights that informed our product development roadmap. Marcus had been promoted to Regional Operations Director, overseeing TechFlow implementations across the Southwest. Uncle Tony served on our advisory board, providing guidance on employee relations and workplace culture. The dismissive daughter who'd been called a disappointment at dinner had become the family member everyone turned to for business advice and strategic guidance. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it no longer carried emotional weight. Success had created space for healing relationships that seemed permanently damaged by years of misunderstanding and dismissal. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father as I reviewed the investment presentation one final time. "Good luck today. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built." The message was simple but meaningful. My father rarely mentioned emotional topics, preferring to express affection through actions rather than words. His acknowledgement of my grandmother's pride represented his own pride, filtered through memories of the woman who'd always believed in my potential. I'd been thinking about my grandmother frequently as TechFlow Solutions approached this inflection point. She'd passed away before witnessing my business success, but her influence remained visible in every aspect of how I approached leadership and decision-making. Her emphasis on treating people with dignity, solving real problems through practical solutions, and building something lasting rather than pursuing quick profits, had shaped our company culture from the beginning. The investment decision would test those values in ways we hadn't previously experienced. Venture capital funding would accelerate our growth and expand our market reach, but it would also introduce external pressures and expectations that could potentially compromise the principles that made TechFlow Solutions successful. David and I had spent months evaluating potential investors, seeking partners who understood our vision and respected our commitment to authentic client relationships rather than purely financial metrics. The three firms represented in today's meeting had demonstrated genuine interest in supporting long-term sustainable growth rather than pushing for rapid scale and exit strategies. But investment partnerships were always complicated, regardless of initial intentions and stated commitments. The conference room gradually filled with representatives from each investment firm, along with TechFlow Solutions executives and board members. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, reflecting the mutual respect that had developed through months of due diligence and strategic discussions. Sarah Chen from Andreessen Horowitz opened the meeting with observations about TechFlow Solutions' unique position in the construction technology marketplace. Most companies in this space are trying to disrupt traditional industries by replacing human expertise with automated systems, she noted. TechFlow Solutions has succeeded by enhancing human expertise through better tools and information. The distinction was important and reflected our fundamental approach to technology development. Rather than viewing construction workers as obstacles to efficiency that needed to be eliminated, we'd designed software that made their skills more valuable and their work more satisfying. Marcus joined the meeting via video conference from Rodriguez Construction's offices in Tucson, providing investor perspective on operational improvements and employee satisfaction metrics. His transformation over the past 2 years had been remarkable, from skeptical family member to passionate advocate for technology integration, who could articulate business benefits through practical examples. The software hasn't replaced skilled workers, Marcus explained to the investors. It's made skilled workers more productive and given them better information for making decisions. Our crew leaders now have real-time access to project schedules, material availability, and weather forecasts that help them optimize their daily workflows. More importantly, he continued, job satisfaction has increased because workers spend less time on paperwork and administrative tasks and more time on actual construction work. Employee retention has improved dramatically, which reduces training costs and maintains project quality. The questions from investors demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both technology capabilities and construction industry dynamics. They'd clearly conducted thorough research into our business model, competitive positioning, and growth potential. But the most probing questions focused on scalability and market expansion challenges. Richard Park from Goldman Sachs addressed the core concern directly. TechFlow Solutions has achieved impressive results with small to medium-sized construction companies that value personal relationships and hands-on support. How do you maintain that approach while serving larger clients that may have different expectations about software deployment and customer service? It was exactly the question I'd been anticipating and preparing to answer for months. Scale doesn't have to mean standardization, I replied. Our software platform is designed with modular architecture that can be customized for different client needs without requiring complete redesign. We have successfully implemented solutions for companies ranging from 10 employees to over 500 employees. But the real answer to your question is that we're not trying to become everything to everyone. We're focused on serving construction companies that share our values about employee development and client relationships. That market segment is large enough to support substantial growth without forcing us to compromise our core principles. David supplemented my response with financial projections showing how TechFlow Solutions could reach $500 million in annual revenue while maintaining current profit margins and client satisfaction metrics. The growth would come through geographic expansion and industry specialization, rather than fundamental changes to our business model. The presentation continued for nearly 3 hours, covering every aspect of our operations, competitive landscape, and strategic vision. The investors asked detailed questions about intellectual property protection, key personnel retention, and potential acquisition opportunities that could accelerate market penetration. But the decisive moment came when Margaret Foster from Kleiner Perkins asked about family business dynamics and potential conflicts of interest. Rodriguez Construction represents a significant portion of your case study portfolio, she observed. How do you ensure that family relationships don't create bias in your business development and client service decisions? The question addressed concerns that had been raised during previous investor discussions. Some potential partners worried that emotional attachments to Rodriguez Construction might prevent TechFlow Solutions from making objective business decisions if circumstances required prioritizing other clients or market opportunities. Rodriguez Construction receives exactly the same service and support as every other TechFlow Solutions client. I answered directly. Their success metrics are tracked and reported using identical systems, and their software implementation followed standard procedures without special accommodations. More importantly, Rodriguez Construction serves as our internal laboratory for testing new features and capabilities before rolling them out to other clients. They experience more experimentation and iteration than typical clients, not less oversight and accountability. Uncle Tony, who joined the meeting as an advisory board member, provided supporting perspective from the client side. I can speak to this directly because I see both sides of the relationship, he said. TechFlow Solutions holds Rodriguez Construction to the same standards as their other clients, sometimes even higher standards because they know we're being watched as a showcase example. But the family connection also means they understand our industry culture and operational realities better than outside consultants who've never worked on actual construction sites. That understanding makes their software more practical and their support more effective. The investors seemed satisfied with our responses, but I could sense they were evaluating intangible factors beyond financial projections and operational metrics. Venture capital decisions often depended on personal chemistry and confidence in leadership capabilities as much as business fundamentals. The formal presentation concluded with discussion of investment terms and timeline for final decisions. All three firms indicated strong interest in participating in the funding round, with Andreessen Horowitz expressing willingness to lead the investment at the proposed valuation. But they requested additional due diligence meetings with key employees and major clients to validate our growth projections and competitive positioning. After the investors left, David and I remained in the conference room to debrief and plan next steps. The meeting had gone better than expected, but the real work was just beginning. They're going to scrutinize everything, David observed. Client contracts, employee agreements, intellectual property filings, competitive analysis, financial controls. We need to be prepared for months of detailed investigation. That's fine, I replied. We have nothing to hide, and the scrutiny will actually help us identify areas where we can improve our operations before scaling up. The due diligence process would be intensive and occasionally intrusive, but it was also an opportunity to validate that TechFlow Solutions was ready for the responsibilities that came with major venture capital investment. More importantly, it was a chance to demonstrate that our success was built on solid foundations, rather than lucky timing or favorable circumstances. Over the following weeks, investors conducted extensive interviews with TechFlow Solutions employees, from senior executives to customer service representatives. They visited client sites across multiple states, observing software implementations and speaking directly with construction workers about their experiences. They also investigated our competitive landscape, analyzing how other construction technology companies approached similar challenges and evaluating our intellectual property protections and market differentiation strategies. The process was exhausting, but ultimately validating. Every investigation confirmed that TechFlow Solutions delivered authentic value to clients through practical solutions and genuine support. Our financial metrics were accurate, our growth projections were realistic, and our competitive advantages were sustainable. But the most meaningful validation came from unexpected sources. Janet Martinez, the plumbing contractor who'd spoken at the Phoenix Forum defending our acquisition of Rodriguez Construction, called me during the third week of due diligence. I wanted you to know that some fancy investors have been asking questions about your company, she said with amusement in her voice. They seemed surprised when I told them that TechFlow Solutions actually delivers what they promise. What do you mean? They acted like companies that keep their commitments and solve real problems are unusual in the technology business. I told them that might be true in Silicon Valley, but it's standard practice in construction, where your reputation depends on getting things done right. Janet's observation highlighted an important distinction that had shaped TechFlow Solutions from the beginning. We'd built our business according to construction industry values rather than technology industry expectations, prioritizing reliable performance over rapid growth and sustainable relationships over aggressive expansion. The approach had initially seemed limiting compared to venture capital-funded competitors who could spend heavily on marketing and sales acceleration, but it had ultimately proven more durable and profitable than strategies based on unsustainable customer acquisition costs and unrealistic revenue projections. Similar feedback came from other clients who'd been contacted during the due diligence process. Construction company owners praised TechFlow Solutions for understanding their operational realities and providing ongoing support rather than simply selling software and disappearing. Employees spoke positively about company culture and growth opportunities, particularly the emphasis on professional development and internal promotion rather than external hiring for senior positions. Even competitors acknowledged that TechFlow Solutions had earned market respect through consistent performance, rather than flashy marketing campaigns or predatory pricing strategies. The investor reports were uniformly positive, confirming our financial projections and validating our strategic approach to market expansion. All three firms committed to participating in the funding round at the proposed valuation. But the decision to accept their investment wasn't automatic. David and I spent several days evaluating the implications of venture capital partnership, considering how external funding would affect our company culture, strategic flexibility, and long-term independence. The money would accelerate growth and provide resources for geographic expansion, advanced product development, and strategic acquisitions. But it would also create pressure for rapid scaling and eventual exit strategies that might conflict with our commitment to sustainable relationships and authentic value creation. The conversation that helped clarify my thinking came during a phone call with my father while I was reviewing investment documents in my Austin apartment. "You seem conflicted about this decision," he observed after I'd explained the funding opportunity and my concerns about maintaining company values. "I am conflicted. The investment would help us grow faster and serve more clients, but it might also change what makes TechFlow Solutions successful in the first place." "What made Rodriguez Construction successful?" my father asked. The question surprised me. Reliable work, fair pricing, and treating employees and clients with respect. Did those values change when TechFlow Solutions acquired Rodriguez Construction? No, they became stronger because we had better tools to deliver on our commitments. Then why would venture capital investment necessarily change TechFlow Solutions' values? My father's logic was characteristically direct and practical. External funding was simply another tool for achieving our objectives, not a fundamental alteration of our identity or principles. The key is choosing investors who understand and support your values rather than trying to change them, he continued. From what you've told me, these firms seem to respect what you've built and want to help you build more of it. The conversation provided the clarity I'd been seeking. TechFlow Solutions had succeeded by solving real problems for real people through practical solutions and genuine relationships. Venture capital investment could accelerate that mission without compromising its authenticity. The final board meeting to approve the investment took place on a Thursday morning in late September. The conference room was filled with TechFlow Solutions executives, advisory board members, and legal representatives who'd spent months negotiating terms and evaluating strategic implications. Uncle Tony attended via video conference from Rodriguez Construction, where he was overseeing implementation of our latest software updates. Marcus joined from the Denver office, where he was establishing our new regional headquarters. My father participated from Tucson, representing the family perspective on our growth strategy. The vote was unanimous to accept the $150 million investment at an $800 million valuation. The celebration was immediate but subdued, reflecting recognition that the real work was just beginning. Venture capital funding created opportunities and responsibilities that would test our capabilities and values in ways we hadn't previously experienced. But it also represented validation that TechFlow Solutions had built something valuable and sustainable that could benefit thousands of construction companies and hundreds of thousands of workers across the United States. The announcement generated significant media coverage, with business publications highlighting TechFlow Solutions as an example of successful technology integration in traditional industries. Construction trade magazines featured our story as evidence that established companies could modernize without losing their cultural identity or operational expertise. But the most meaningful recognition came from clients who expressed excitement about accelerated product development and expanded service capabilities that venture capital funding would make possible. Rodriguez Construction held a company-wide celebration to mark the milestone, recognizing their role in demonstrating that construction technology could enhance rather than replace human expertise. The event brought together employees who'd witnessed our transformation from acquisition target to industry showcase. My father spoke at the celebration, addressing the gathered crowd with characteristic directness and unexpected emotion. 5 years ago, I thought technology was a threat to everything we'd built in the construction industry, he admitted. I was wrong. Technology is only a threat if you let other people control it instead of learning to use it yourself. Natalie and TechFlow Solutions didn't replace what made Rodriguez Construction successful. They gave us better tools to be successful. Now we're not just building better buildings. We're building a better future for everyone who works in construction. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, reflecting genuine appreciation for leadership that had improved their professional lives while respecting their skills and experience. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when my father approached me privately. "I owe you another apology," he said quietly. "For what?" "For taking so long to understand what you were trying to accomplish. You weren't running away from construction. You were running toward a way to make construction better. You don't owe me any apologies, Dad. We all learned from this experience." "Maybe, but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built, and grateful that you used your success to help other people, instead of just proving a point." The conversation represented complete reconciliation between us, healing wounds that had seemed permanent just a few years earlier. Success had created space for forgiveness and understanding that hadn't been possible when our relationship was defined by disappointment and unfulfilled expectations. 6 months after the venture capital investment, TechFlow Solutions had expanded to 1,200 employees across 8 regional offices, serving over 4,000 construction companies throughout the United States. Our software platform had evolved to include advanced features for project management, safety monitoring, environmental compliance, and financial analysis. Rodriguez Construction had grown to 93 employees and $8.7 million in annual revenue, making it one of the most successful construction companies in Arizona. They'd been featured in industry publications as a model for technology integration and workplace modernization. Marcus had been promoted to Vice President of Regional Operations, overseeing TechFlow Solutions' expansion across the western United States. Uncle Tony served as Senior Advisor for Industry Relations, helping us understand cultural dynamics and operational challenges in different regional markets. But perhaps the most significant development was personal rather than professional. Standing in my Austin office on a Friday afternoon in March, reviewing quarterly reports that showed TechFlow Solutions had exceeded every growth projection and profitability target, I realized that success no longer felt like vindication or rebellion against family expectations. It simply felt like work that mattered, relationships that enriched my life, and opportunities to solve problems that improved other people's lives. The disappointing daughter who'd been dismissed at dinner tables had become someone who created opportunities for thousands of families to build better futures. The technology that had initially divided me from my family had ultimately brought us closer together than we'd ever been. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Dinner Sunday at 6. Mom's making tamales. Marcus is flying in from Denver. Can you make it?" I smiled while typing my response. "Wouldn't miss it." The dinner table, where everything had started, would welcome me home again. But this time, as someone who belonged there completely. Not because I'd proven anything to anyone, but because I'd learned that family relationships, like business relationships, flourished when built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than obligation and expectation. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. That evening, as I walked through downtown Austin toward my apartment, I passed construction sites that would soon be using TechFlow Solutions software to coordinate their operations. Workers who might never know my name would have safer, more efficient, and more satisfying careers because of tools my company had developed. The impact extended far beyond financial metrics or market valuation. Technology that had started as a solution to my father's business problems had become a platform for improving working conditions and professional opportunities throughout an entire industry. Standing at the intersection where Congress Avenue met the Colorado River, watching the sun set behind the Austin skyline, I thought about the path that had led from community college classrooms to venture capital boardrooms, from family disappointment to industry recognition. The journey had been longer and more complex than any business plan could have predicted. But it had also been more meaningful and rewarding than I'd imagined possible when I first started writing code to solve construction problems. Success, I'd learned, wasn't just about proving capabilities or earning recognition. It was about using whatever talents and opportunities you possessed to make life better for other people, including the people who disappointed you along the way. My grandmother had been right about seeing solutions where others saw problems. But she'd also been right about something more important, that the best solutions were the ones that brought people together rather than driving them apart. TechFlow Solutions had succeeded because it strengthened relationships rather than replacing them, enhanced human capabilities rather than making them obsolete, and created value for everyone involved rather than extracting value from vulnerable parties. Those principles would guide our continued growth as we expanded into new markets and developed more sophisticated technologies. But they would also guide my personal relationships as our family continued building on the foundation of mutual respect and shared success we'd established. The sun disappeared behind the downtown buildings, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that reflected off the river's surface. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight I was simply grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. Walking home through streets filled with the energy of a growing city, I felt something I'd been seeking since childhood but had never quite achieved until now. I felt like I belonged exactly where I was, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with exactly the people who mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.